Being scared's a superpower. Well, I tried to get some guidance by asking on Twitter what I should do for my next list, and pretty much everyone who responded gave me a different answer, so heck with it, I'm doing my own choice. So, seeing as this is October, let's go with picking my picks for the top 10 scariest Doctor Who episodes. Now, I expect this list to be heavily argued. I think there are few things more subjective than what scares you, with the possible exception of what makes you laugh. And hey, guess what list I'm gonna do next? But in any case, when I say these are the scariest episodes, I'm not talking about episodes with the scariest moments or the scariest, single scenes. I'm talking about a pervasive, important element of the episode that I personally found scary. And do remember, this is a personal ranking, which means there are some things that I personally find more scary than others that may not be the case for you. I absolutely feel that the top 10 that I have picked are good, solid picks. The order in which I'm ranking them, that I think is probably where I'm going to get a bit more argument. But that's enough preamble. Let's get right into it with number 10. Hyde. This is an episode a lot of people seem to have forgotten about, but I actually rather like, and the presentation of it as setting it up as a haunted house and how sort of disjointed and creepy the monster is until we get a good look at it. I think they show it a bit more clearly than they should have, but the way it moves and the fact that the Doctor himself gets scared outright, and not just like in the moment, oh, run down the corridor, like he's scared and says as much, and that's not something we see very often. I think that adds to the feel of it as well. And it's just got a lot of really good kind of gothic atmosphere. It doesn't quite get as deep into the fear as some of the ones above it, which is why it's occupying the number 10 spot. But I think I think in general it's a better episode than it's given credit for, and especially when you look at it in terms of a scary episode. Number 9, Silence in the Library and Forest of the Dead. Now, part of me really wanted to put this two-parter up higher, and I suppose this is your reminder, I do count two-parters as only one story. And the reason I couldn't is, as much as I love this story, and it's one of my favorites of all time, the fear element, while good, is also not the best thing about it, and there are other episodes that I do find scarier, but Shadows That Eat You, that's unnerving. And it also does something that I really, really enjoy, which is that not every shadow is a problem, but any shadow could be. And that uncertainty, I think, is really important and a big part of what makes it work as well as it does. It's not just fear of the dark. It's the fear of not knowing, like, maybe I could run through the shadow and be fine, or maybe it'll be the death of me. I don't know. So I generally find that more frightening and unnerving, that sense of uncertainty, as opposed to being certain, well, if I do that, I will die. It's like, maybe I will. And that means that this choice that I make to do that thing or to not do that thing carries much more consequence to it, and it is very possible to make the wrong choice and have never had a chance to know otherwise. And there's some additional nice little creepy moments too. The faces and the computer thing, that's not a bad touch either. And I just love this episode anyway, but I do think that the Vashta Nerada are a good example of a nice scary monster. Number 8, Listen. Listen is an episode that I'm gonna have to do a deeper dive into one of these days, because it's an episode that I think less of the more time passes. But I do think that when this episode is working, it's working great. I love the upfront premise of it. I love the Doctor talking about this thing that is always hiding, and it's perfect hiding, and it's always right there, but you can never actually see it. And I like that we don't even get a 100% confirmation that this thing exists, or that it's just some obsession that the Doctor has latched onto. We don't really get a confirmation either way, and I like that as well. There's just some great scenes with the form under the sheet in Danny's room, the scene at the end of time where it's like there's no one left. So who's knocking outside? I mean, that's one of the classic sort of writing exercise prompts. The last man on earth is inside an empty house and there's a knock at the door. There was a time when I probably would have put this in the top 5, if not top 3, but unfortunately revisiting it, there are aspects that don't work for me, and honestly, as much as I love his initial setup and explanation of the thing, the Doctor talks too much. There are moments, especially in the bedroom with young Danny, that would have sat so much better and been so much more tense if he had just stopped talking for a bit. But I still think that when the tension is properly rationed in this episode, that it is really unnerving. And now we're going to move up to the one that I know is the one I'm going to get a lot of heat for not putting higher. Number 7, Waters of Mars. Now, I've talked about Waters of Mars before and my feelings on it. I did a video just about that, so I wouldn't have to keep explaining to people why, while I do enjoy this episode, I'm not in love with it the way so many people are. Now, this is a good, scary episode, and the whole image of, the black mouth and the crack, that's a good, scary image, and the way it spreads works. I really like the progression of it in that one woman who's put in quarantine, and so at first you're like, well, maybe it doesn't take over right away, then later you find out it does, and it really does a great job at creating a real sense of foreboding around the water. So why am I not putting it higher on the lists? To be blunt about it, the flood basically play out as zombie analogs, and I'm kind of over zombies, and zombies have never been especially scary to me in the first place. So it's good, and I get why people love this episode. I get why people are scared by it. It's just, this is where the subjective thing that I talked about comes in, which is that what it is playing up as scary is not particularly inherently scary to me. Other stuff is. That stuff's gonna be higher. That's what happens. Number 6, The Impossible Planet and the Satan Pit. No, it's not because I think the devil is an inherently scary figure. It can be if played right, but ultimately this is just about the way certain moments are built up. That scene where the voice is talking to Toby and it's saying, I'm right behind you, don't turn around, if you turn around you'll die. Like, that's weird and unnerving, and nothing would ever talk like that. It's this disturbing voice, and you feel like you're sitting in the seat where Toby is sitting. You're like, oh my God, what would I do? That's a wonderfully tense scene, and there's just a great thread through the whole thing. And a big part of why I think this one works is it actually underplays. The score really factors into this. Doctor Who can get a little bombastic with its score sometimes. It's completely underplayed here. It's a very melancholy score. It actually reminds me a lot of the soundtrack from Firefly at times. But just the moments like when possessed Toby is standing out in the vacuum of space, just grinning, like, that's unnerving. And then of course we have the Ood when they all go red in the eyes, and when this thing's just, you see the impact of the things that the beast says has on each of the crew members as it expresses how much it knows about them and about their dark secrets in their past that people shouldn't know, that nobody should know, and that we don't even get a full explanation of. It's all fantastic stuff, and it builds really well. And again, there's another one that I love this story, would have liked to have put it higher, except that ultimately once we see it, while I do think that the beast is very well realized, it does make it a little less viscerally scary, because we see it and we can wrap our head around it and go, oh, so that's what it is. So that's why it's not higher, but I love this episode, and I do think it ratchets up the tension really well. Number 5, World Enough and Time. This is a completely different kind of scary, because this is just getting under your skin creepy on a conceptual level. And my hat has to go off to this episode for making Cybermen creepy and for really delving into something that the show as a whole, New Who especially, has kind of skimmed over, which is just how unnerving the concept of the Cybermen are. They kind of get played up more as just a generic robotic enemy, but the fact that these were once people, and that the process that is gone through, especially with these early versions, to convert them is horrifying. I remember the skin crawling on the back of my neck when Bill goes into this hospital wing, and she goes up to this one and she adjusts this thing that a nurse had been messing with earlier, and you think it's like some sort of, maybe it's a painkiller she's messing with, but it's just a volume knob, and the guy's just going, kill me, kill me, kill me over and over, and all the nurse did was turn the volume down. And the whole idea that this is going to be a horrific existence, but people are going to do it just so they can continue to exist, and that there really aren't ways to make it less horrific, just things that they can add to make you not care as much that it is a horrific, terrible existence. It's disturbing not just because of the body horror aspect, but the idea of what human beings are willing to allow to happen to themselves and to their society just for the sake of continuing to exist. That's an unnerving concept, and it's well handled here. Number 4, the other one that I'm going to get some hassle on for it not being further up on the list, Blink. Blink is another one that works really well. Now, this is one that, again, probably the reason it's not higher on the list is that it doesn't have an inherent fear factor for me. The notion of these statues that move, it's a little creepy, it's a little unnerving. It's a good idea, but again, it doesn't sort of hit my personal fear buttons quite as hard. However, the execution on this is darn near flawless. It's possibly a little bit jump scare heavy just because of the nature of how the weeping angels move, but it works here, and it works as jump scares because you get the jump of, oh, it's there, but then it's frozen and it's just there, and so it really does sort of let you live in that fear moment for a while, a lot more than a jump scare would usually do. And then, of course, the whole way the narrative plays out, as we don't really know what the deal with these angels are, and we see them move long before we have any concept of what is going on with them, and it's just disturbing. And then we find out more about them, like, oh, well, that's not pleasant, and they're moving and it's unnerving. And then when we finally see the very nasty faces from them, which is only towards the end that we see them pull those out, oh yeah, really, really well executed. With number 3, we are going to get to a creature that on a conceptual level bears a lot of similarities to the Weeping Angels, but this is a case where, for me, remember how I said the Weeping Angels didn't quite hit my own buttons? This one does, and that's the Silence, which means we are talking about the Impossible Astronaut and Day of the Moon. I find the Silence very, very unnerving, and for initially a part of it is a similar thing to the Weeping Angels, which is that if you stop looking at them, you're completely doomed. The mechanics of it are a little bit different, but the gimmick is effectively the same. But the way in which it works, to me, is fundamentally more unnerving, because I find it more disturbing, this idea of, as long as you're not looking at this thing, you don't even remember it. Messing with somebody mentally is something that really kind of gets under my own skin. The idea that you cannot count on your own brain, on your own memory, on your own thought process, that they have been turned against you or they don't work. And additionally, in this case, you won't even know that. You won't have a hope of even realizing that. That is really unnerving to me, and I love the look of these things. I love the way that they're framed and the shot and lit and designed. If I had one criticism, I think the whole lightning thing that they do is unnecessary, and I think they actually would have been even scarier if we didn't even know what they were capable of, aside from the whole memory wipe thing, that maybe they could do all sorts of other stuff, but we don't even know. We just sort of know that they're there, and we know how widespread they are and the ubiquity of them, but we don't. I think it would have worked better if we didn't see anything more that they could actually do. Otherwise, honestly, this would have had a shot at the top spot, at least for me, and what gets under my skin, but it doesn't. So let's get to number 2. The Empty Child and the Doctor Dances. Probably the single monster villain thing that creeped me out more than anything else in Doctor Who to date. Are You My Mummy? The Empty Child is so disturbing to me for so many reasons. First of all, the look, that gas mask is immediately iconic and yet wonderfully mysterious, because you have no idea what's under there. It could be anything under there. It could, in fact, be a small boy. It could be something that bears no resemblance to a small boy whatsoever. But then, this is one of the rare cases where learning more about it actually makes it scarier. And that almost never happens, because generally the more you learn about something, the more you can wrap your head around it, the less frightened you are of it. But for me at least, when we realize that this ultimately was just a small child trying to find its mother, and that is in fact, in its essence, what it was, that made this all the more scary and all the more disturbing to me. There is something really terrifying to me about this idea of a child that has the power to destroy almost everything it touches, but A, probably doesn't realize that, and B, doesn't understand the world enough and understand cause and effect and consequences of its actions enough to understand why it has to stop what it's doing. Because the only thing that matters to a child as young as this is where's my mother? And the fact that it could tear the world apart and probably would never even realize that this is a problem, because at the age that this child was when it became the empty child, its priorities are, get me my mother. And it's going to destroy the world to do it. And that, to me, this idea of something so powerful and so damaging with not even the complete mind, but the fractured mind of a child, I find that really unnerving and really disturbing and really, really scary. But it doesn't take the number one spot. Now, I have a feeling if you've been paying attention, you might have figured out what the number one is. Because what's something that I've brought up over and over and over again? Uncertainty, the unknown. The less we know, the scarier it is. So that means that, for my money, the scariest episode of New Era Doctor Who has to be Midnight. Because we don't know what that thing was. We don't know what its goals were. We don't know how really it did anything it did. And that makes it unnerving. And bonus on this, it's not just the midnight entity. It's not just the monster that is scary. It also does what so many great horror stories do, which is to make the humans scary as well. The people are part of the problem. They are just as dangerous, if not more so, than this thing that we don't even understand what it is and how it works. And just watching it progress because I mean, initially having something repeat your words back to you, that's just annoying. But then as it starts closing that gap, and then when it's speaking at the same time as the Doctor, and then that moment when it's ahead of him, and it's just, that is such a wonderful moment, perfectly built up to, perfectly executed, wonderfully tense the instant this thing is introduced into the setting, until it is, even after it's gone, you're still, because you don't know what it was, you're still going, And that is why, for my money, Midnight is the scariest episode of New Who. So those are my thoughts. That's my list. What are your thoughts? Do you have a list you want to throw out there? Whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Don't forget to like, subscribe, check me out on Twitter at Council of Geeks. Give a listen to the Council of Geeks podcast, available on iTunes and Stitcher. I am also one half of the Punch Like a Girl podcast, available on the Fire and Water Network, fireandwaterpodcast.com. Until next time, this council is adjourned.